Hey everyone, how are you? My name is Blair Sinta. Today I'm going to have a conversation with Gunnar Olsen, really fabulous drummer out in New York City. Currently he's playing with Puscifer. He's recorded with and toured with Mother Feather, Big Data, Mike Snow, Bruce Springsteen, Philip Phillips, who else? Miley Cyrus, Goo Goo Dolls. Pretty great resume. I met Gunnar basically through Instagram, admiring his sounds and his unique style, his kind of heavy hitting style that he really makes work in the studio. I really feel like he's got a pretty cool individual voice. So we talk about him getting into recording, some of his processes, some of the ways he gets his sounds. I'd never met him before, and he's a really fabulous guy. So check it out. If you like it, please leave some comments. You can ask questions in the descriptions below. If you're digging what I do here, please check out my 5 fundamentals to studio drumming. It's in the description below. And it's a free lesson. 5 concepts on things I work on, have continually worked on to help my playing live and in the studio. It's a free lesson. There's also a link to Sweetwater Sounds. So any of the gear that we're talking about, you can check it out through Sweetwater and get it there. Without further ado, my interview with Gunnar Olsen. I hope you dig it.
Yeah, go full nerd.
Exactly.
I feel like, yeah,
Full nerd.
totally.
Yeah, because I mean, God, there's so many guys doing this, but not necessarily at like the level. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah. Are we going? Are we in it?
yeah, we can be in it. Yeah, I just started it, and
No, all good.
I found you through Instagram, just like
Yeah.
as we do, and I was like, oh, this dude.
Yeah, same.
Like
Yeah, I think because of the loop loft stuff, that's how I found out about you.
right. So tell me, like Mother Feather, totally rad, love it.
Oh, cool.
Big
Thanks.
Data, and then when I figured out you played with Mike Snow, which like, I have very vivid memories of that first Mike Snow record. I remember doing a gig. I was in Singapore doing a gig, and I had this incredible hotel room and just playing that record.
Oh yeah, totally.
And just being like, okay, I need to figure out. I think that was late 2009. I was like, I got to figure out how to incorporate electronics and acoustic drums like this. I want to be able to get sounds that blend together like that,
Yeah.
And so when did you start like recording yourself? What was the interest there? Was it like high school band stuff? Like
I mean, the earliest was I got a 4-track when I was in high school, and I don't think I really ever recorded the drums with it. I had taught myself to play guitar just so I could play along to my favorite like Green Day and punk rock records.
Right.
And then my mom got me a 4-track. I don't even think I asked for it. I think she just kind of saw that it might be fun for me.
Oh wow.
And I remember just kind of recording, I don't know, whatever you record at that age.
Right.
But I really kind of just never, I always just wanted to be a performing drummer. It was the trajectory of recording wasn't really on the radar for me. And it really wasn't until like maybe 2004 or so, a buddy of mine gave me Ableton Live, like a really early version. And even then I wasn't even thinking about recording myself playing. It was just at the time it was like cutting up, samples from songs I like and turning them into other songs.
Oh wow.
And just trying to like make music within the computer. I didn't even have any like way to plug a synth into my computer. I was just doing everything in the box.
Right.
And it was probably almost like 10 years before I started thinking, I was, in the meantime, I was doing like sessions with mostly my bands and slowly working my way into becoming like a session drummer. But I was always kind of relying on other people to do the recording.
Right.
I remember doing, do you know Chris Shaw?
No.
He's a producer engineer. He did like the Blue album. by Weezer.
Yep.
He was an engineer on that, and I worked with him. My old band, The Exit, he came in and engineered some of it and mixed some of it.
Okay.
And I remember, just kind of watching what he was doing, and he's a great engineer. And I remember he made this comment. He was like, "Oh, I kind of wish I never bought Pro Tools, because that was a day my life as a musician kind of ended, and I kind of went more into engineering." And I think what he was kind of saying was, once he started kind of trying to be a musician, but also engineer himself, it kind of diluted the musician part of him.
Mm.
And part of him was saying, "Oh, I kind of wish I stayed a musician. Maybe I could have explored being an artist more instead of turning into, an engineer." But he also, I think he shines in that, so it's probably a good decision for him. But I remember thinking,
But that must have been post Blue album, though.
oh, this was like 2003, 2004.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so at this point he had done like, Sky Blue Sky with Wilco, and like he had some pretty awesome credits.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But the point I'm trying to make is, like, him saying that kind of stuck with me, where I was like, well, I really love being a drummer. I don't really, I live in New York City, so I don't even have access to a drum set 24/7.
Right.
I had to go to practice spaces, and it just kind of was never even an option to think about, oh, I'll set up my drums and record them.
Such a different, right? Because in LA, the funny thing is, I moved here in '96, and that was, in a certain way, it was always on the radar for me. Not necessarily having a studio, but having a house with a garage so I could
Right.
drums whenever I wanted.
I know.
In New York City, that is just like that's just out the window.
Yeah, I mean,
Most people.
when I got my first drum set, my dad lived in this building at the time, which was an anomaly, where there was 3 drummers who lived in this apartment building in Manhattan. So we somehow got away with me having a kit for like a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then he moved out of that location. And then, from that point on, it was having a drum set at like a rehearsal spot that somebody he knew who was a musician, and then like a friend's basement. And even till this day, I've never lived anywhere and had a drum set where I live, which I don't think is that crazy. But, I see people like my friends who live in California or smaller states, and, they're in their garage every day with their mics. And I'm just like, dang it. Like, that would be really, I don't know, maybe it makes me appreciate it in a different way. But the long answer is, it took a long time before I was even able to, figure out how to plug in all the mics and get things to work through preamps. And
Right. But you obviously were paying attention in those sessions. You're like, oh, that's kind of interesting.
Well, the thing is, I've only ever I was in all the sessions, and everyone was always using Pro Tools, which I never officially learned.
Okay.
I still, to this day, I just use Ableton, and which I think because I started in Ableton and kind of learned how to use it pretty well in terms of making beats and making music, I definitely utilize the things I learned in it to approach how I record drums into it, and how I can edit stuff. And so many hours for years sitting behind engineers, watching them do Pro Tools and taking, 2 minutes to make an edit, which I can make in 2 seconds in Ableton.
Mm-hmm.
But, then there's limitations because I can't, group stuff and quantize everything at once like you can in Pro Tools. And there's limitations to both.
But you're obviously really competent in Ableton. So, I had a similar thing. At one point I was using Pro Tools, Logic, and Ableton.
Right.
And I was like, this is like, it's a total mind fuck.
Yeah.
So I just bailed on Logic. I'm like, okay, I use Ableton for this. I'm like, not, 80% Pro Tools.
Yeah.
But
yeah, the way I looked at it was like, if I'm going to slowly start getting into this, I don't want to slow down. Right. And the quickest way for me to not slow down was just kind of adapt Ableton to what I needed in terms of multi-tracking drums.
Right.
Which I don't know. The fun thing about Ableton is everyone I know who uses it and loves it uses it slightly different.
Yeah.
You know, it really is a choose your own adventure. So, you know, I found a way that works, and it's been working for the remote stuff I do for years now. So, I mean, I kind of at some point imagine I'll move on to Pro Tools, but then, you know, another year passes and I've done 20 recordings in a month, and it's kind of like until I need to, and someone's like, hey, I don't know, I'm trying to kind of move forward, and I really enjoy using it. So
I think at the end of the day, when you send WAV files and they
Yeah.
sound good, no one gives a shit.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, hopefully.
What I wanted, like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but
So what was the first thing that you bought to start to get into it? You're like, okay, I'm going to commit to this. And what was the thing that said, okay, you know, because you said you're like, I'm a little afraid of
yeah.
like crossing that bridge.
So, I mean, the first thing I got that felt like pro to me was just a simple Apogee Duet.
Yep.
And that, you know, that was still before I was really recording drums, and I was just now I could do a synth or a guitar into my computer, and I could do a 2-mic setup at my practice space for drums, which I still didn't really do that often. And then in 2014, I got this massive gig with a group of guys doing audio library music for YouTube.
Oh, okay.
So in the course of a year, we made like 500 songs for their audio library, and it was like covering every genre, you know, folk to electric to, I was like making dubstep songs, you know, like doing YouTube tutorials, like how do I make a dubstep song, you know? So it was a really fun year, but I was literally just making music every day, sometimes like making 3 or 4 songs a day.
Right.
So for the majority of the drum recording, we were doing that at a studio at Trout Studios.
Okay.
With Bryce Goggin, he does stuff with Fish and Pavement, and has a bunch of great credits. So he was recording all the live band stuff, and then I was continuing to make a lot of the electronic stuff on my at home. But there was days where I couldn't get into the studio, so I bought Easy Drummer, you know, and I was just making stuff in my bedroom because like I said, I didn't have my own studio.
Yeah.
So we were doing that for a while, and I had a good year on paper. So I was like, oh man, I need more tax write-offs. So I got the Apollo 8 Universal Audio. And that was like the first thing where I was like, oh, well, if I bring this to my practice space, I can actually record a full drum kit. So that was kind of the first piece of gear that I bought in terms of that, you know, recording myself. And then shortly into 2015, I moved into this place, which is Russell Street Recording, where it's kind of like a co-op studio, and I have like 4 to 6 days a month. And when I moved in here, I moved in here with the company. I was doing all the audio library stuff called Track Tribe.
Okay.
And so we were continuing to do music for YouTube and Facebook. And, you know, I was starting to do a little bit of remote recording, but every time I would record, I would still have my buddy or either somebody who works at the studio or a guitarist. They would have to set me up because I didn't know how to use any of the gear.
Sure.
And I would say it wasn't until about 2017 that I could, you know, turn the key, walk into the studio by myself and just do it. So the majority of the recording gear, you know, I have my own mics and such, but I really use most of the stuff that's at this studio.
Wow.
So it's kind of afforded me the luxury to not have to go down the route of buying all this gear. And then, you know, I've accumulated stuff over the years and little things that I like, but I really just mostly use this studios. And there's a few other studios in New York that I have relationships with people and go in there and record stuff. So for the most part, it's mostly, stuff at studios that I'm working at in
Right.
terms of gear. So
It's really interesting. So you're definitely limited to, the mic collection, which may be, whatever that is, but like
yeah,
it is what it is, and you're making it work.
yeah, like I've supplemented a few things over the last year or so, like getting myself an M160 and the V Kick by SE Electronics. And
What is that? More of a sub or just a kick mic?
no, it's the SE Electronics, like it's their kick mic. It's called the
Okay.
V Kick.
Okay.
I saw Aaron Sterling using it, and I was like, well, he's raving about it, and he sounds pretty good. So yeah, in the last 6 months, I've seen a lot of my friends using it also, which is
Okay.
just interesting to see. I mean, it sounds great. It
Yeah.
kind of does like the D112 thing, but better.
Mhm.
And it's simple. And like I said, I like when you reach out to me, I was like, this will be fun. I still feel like such a total hack.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, the studio here has pretty great mics. We have the Coles. We had the what is it, the 412? Where are those Tom mics?
421s.
Yeah, we had those, which were fine. I ended up getting a pair of these like Audio Technica. I think they're like A221s.
Mm-hmm.
Really simple. They have the clips they have the clips so you can put them on the drums.
Yep.
And they sound fine. And
I used to buy some biodynamics that have a clip too. I have a pair of 421s and I've A-B'd them, and I'm really happy with them. There's no mic stands.
yeah, and yeah, this is not the biggest studio. It's more of a boutique studio. It kind of has a living room apartment vibe, and then there's sort of ISO booth. And for years we were doing the drums out here,
Mm-hmm.
and only the last 3 months, really in the Corona age, we put the drums in the ISO booth, and it honestly changed the game, like just sounds wise. Yeah, so that's kind of
It's super dry, and then you're expanding that sound as you need.
it's super dry, and then sometimes I'll leave the door open and we'll put a mic just outside the door, or 10 feet away. And it's funny, like I think because of maybe it's just who I've been working with, but I don't even people don't really seem to care if there's a room mic too much these days.
Mm-hmm.
I think the people that are reaching out to me to do remote recording are trying to, I would like to think, utilize the character of my playing. And I think people probably aren't reaching out to me if they want that like textbook, like I need every drum sound possible when I get these files back.
Mm-hmm.
And we live in this world where you don't really need to have a great live room anymore with all the plugins available. So
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we're definitely like recording these days is in your face. We're used to hearing samples.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I've talked to, one particular, I was talking to Joe Ciccarelli one time, and he was talking about, a particular sample library that he uses, even some of the sample libraries that he's helped make with well-known drummers.
Yeah.
And just how sometimes those, no matter, I mean, we're talking Joe Ciccarelli, right? One of the great engineers / drum engineers. And, sometimes he's adding samples and stuff because it's just what it needs. And
I mean, it's honestly, if you're really going to go to that level, that next level of Uber produced sound, I don't really know how you do it without samples, just because it's the sound that our ears are so used to.
mm-hmm.
So I tend to not, I'm lucky enough to most of the clients I work with are pretty badass producers.
Mm-hmm.
So what they're looking for, they're not looking for, I almost feel like they're looking for the energy of a drummer.
Mm-hmm.
And sounds that are clean enough that they can use. Because at the end of the day, if it's gonna try to be on the radio or alt radio, it almost doesn't matter if the feel. Not the feel. It almost, it's probably gonna get quantized to some degree these days.
Right.
But maybe not. But my point is, like, yeah, it's like you said, in your face, clean sounds, and yeah, there's going to be samples along the way for
Right.
sure.
There's still a vibe from a live drummer. There's some bleed. I
Yes.
think is important. You're always going to have hi-hat bleed into a snare mic, and you know, a lot of people, engineer whatever's, they complain about that, but there's something about the air and that interaction between the drums, toms ringing, cymbals ringing into things.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. It's capturing vibe.
Yeah.
And samples, as rad as they sound, even if programming is great, they can't capture that human part of it.
Yeah, the ghost notes, the little, I don't know. I mean, you can obviously do ghost notes with, you know, plugins and stuff, but it's just, it never, I don't know, it just never is the same.
Yeah, there's a humanity to probably, I mean, it's really hard to put into words, right? There's something in it, even if samples are added.
Well, it's funny, like I was mentioning before, I kind of got into more recording myself, and I had Easy Drummer on my computer, and I spent about 6 months using it a lot because it was just easier to, you know, I was making this music that I wasn't really attached to, right? It was audio library music. So the goal was make it sound genre specific and sound good and just be done with it. So it was, you know, a part of me was like, you're a drummer. Why are you programming Easy? But it just was for the sake of time and ease. It was just easy. But the fun challenge about it was, over 6 months that I was using it, was, the goal was, can I make this actually, can I trick somebody into thinking this is a real drummer, which is more just for my own kind of amusement.
Sure.
And I'll definitely listen back to, I'll go through the audio library because we have all these songs in there, and I'll listen back. And sometimes I honestly don't know if I played it on a real kit or not, because, you know, I was playing on maybe an SPDS, so I was able to get the actual timing and feel a bit, and then kind of go in and nudge it a little bit if it needed it. But
you were capturing like a little piece of you by doing it.
Yeah. But I think by kind of getting myself used to these really uber great sounds, when I started then recording myself for real, at first I was like, oh, this is awful. This sounds terrible. But it kind of set this bar that I've been like it set this bar of maybe perfection that isn't attainable, but it was also, I don't know, I feel like it primed me in a weird way to kind of hit the ground running with this base level of like, what do clean sounds need to sound like?
Right.
And
those are pretty high standards coming from samples.
Yes. But my point being is I think it actually helped my ear in terms of being able to know quicker if like a sound is working. Right. And also just, you know, there's such a difference between a great sounding sample and then just having all your mics up and having the kit sound great. You know, like I'll find often where I get the kit to sound good, and then I listen back to the rack tom by itself, and it's like, oh, this would never be in a sample library. This doesn't sound good, but in the context of everything,
right,
this sounds good.
I think that's one of the big hurdles, is when you often listen to a snare mic soloed, it kind of sounds like, it's kind of like, oh, I don't know, but you need the whole context.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's definitely an argument for EQing things when they're soloed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you're fully out of context. So why would you EQ? Like if you're trying to duck something, well, listen to it in the context of the kit. Maybe you need to duck it. Maybe you don't.
Yeah. I think it's also, you know, have you run into this where, I don't know, I've had a few clients I've worked with, and that just weren't happy with something. And, you know, I try to do what I can, but I think sometimes the thing that I'm kind of curious what your approach is when I'm getting my sounds. I like to get them to sound pretty good in the room and get myself feeling good about it. But then when you're sending off the files, you have to, you know, I'll take all the plugins I'm putting on off and keep it cleaner. But then, you know, unless somebody wants that, I tend to send things pretty clean.
Okay.
And I always want the times that I feel like people have kind of pushed back on a sound. I've then gone back and kind of put my processing back on and say, oh, does this change the sound of it? Because I always wonder, are people getting so used to using these samples that sound so great that maybe they don't really know how to take what you've sent them and make it sound, you know, like they don't really know, you know, I know personally, like, oh, I rely on my overhead a lot for this particular sound.
Right.
But someone might just say, oh, you didn't send me a hi-hat mic for this track.
Right.
Well, there's a ton of hi-hat in the snare mic and the overhead.
Right.
But, you know, that's kind of something I always wonder about, how other drummers, like, when you're sending stuff, do you send dry wet options? Do you keep it pretty dry?
I do. Well, I do both. Well, it's kind of a two-part question, right? So I do think, yes, I always send a stereo 2-track of, you know, when you're sending like, okay, hey, I'm finished. Do you dig this?
Yeah.
Sending it off with the song. You know, here's how the drums sound. I've EQ'd, I've compressed what I need to.
Yeah.
And I usually stay fairly light on compression unless it's, you know, but if I do go heavy on something in an effect, it's usually bust somewhere where I can print it separately.
Right.
And they can literally mute that shit and then it's dry.
Yeah.
And I try to let them know that. I'm like, hey, that reverb I put on the snare, if you don't dig it, it can be gone in one click.
Yep.
You know, but to me, it felt like this is helping, you know, the sound of it. So I try to give options in there. Like, I've tried to have all the options, but at this point, I'm definitely not afraid to EQ and go hard. Well, you know, sometimes I'm repeating myself, but I also know if I know who's going to mix it.
Exactly.
If I know it's like a heavy cat, then I will back off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm like, okay, so-and-so's touching this. I'm gonna let them do their thing and not commit them to what I think is good in my room.
No, that's kind of where I'm going with this. It's until very recently, most of the remote stuff I was doing was for people I knew. And, you know, in the last 4 months, obviously with the world kind of turning itself on end, I've gotten a lot more work with people I've never met before. And the challenge of that, which is, it's exciting and I'm working more, but the challenge is kind of, how do I gauge what I think people want? And then obviously, you know, you ask them, but I think sometimes without that kind of relationship built in, it's kind of hard to, it can be a challenge. Like, am I sending it too clean? Should I dig in more to what I think the song needs? And I don't know, it's more of just, I'm kind of just thinking out loud, like, because I haven't really talked about this stuff with in such a specific way.
I kind of expect most people are not going to be able to kind of recreate what I'm hearing over here.
Yep.
So I go pretty heavy in. I try to make that 2-track that I was talking about. Like, maybe this will work in your mix. You know, often we're early enough where it's hard to say like where the track is going to go with layers and stuff. But you know, hopefully this is a pretty good mix and it might work when you actually mix. But then, you know, I'll send maybe a screenshot of levels. This is an interesting subject that I'm coming on with this. Like, do you set your mic pre's and everything so your faders can come to unity and people could literally put everything at 0 and that's the sound that they hear?
Right.
Or, I don't typically do that, but in my head, I'm kind of processing like maybe I need to start doing that. So
Yeah.
people can literally say, oh, how do I get this drum sound? How do we recreate this? You just put everything at 0,
Yeah, that's kind of where I've been leaning kind of towards that mostly, where I want to have a pretty basic sound that, yeah, when people import the files, you're kind of there.
Mm-hmm.
It's, or at least it's obvious, maybe not with the panning. Like I said, it depends who I'm working with. If I leave in my choice of panning,
Mm-hmm.
but I tend to just like say overhead left and right, have those be separate and then be up the middle and do whatever you want with them. But yeah, I've been leaning towards, I want you to get an idea really quick. And, what I try to do now is, hey, are you around? I'm going to be recording your song today. Are you around? And then I'll send them a rough mix like, hey, am I going in the right direction?
Mm-hmm.
I think I used to not do that with some weird fear that they would say no. And then I'll just send them all the stuff when I'm done and hopefully it works out. And because I think I was afraid of criticism, but then realizing like that makes no sense. Like your job will be so much easier if they say, oh, actually, can you try a different snare sound or more ring, less ring?
Right.
Have you used that Listen To app?
I did it yesterday.
Do you have it or did someone else have it?
Somebody else had it. Well, I downloaded the trial, and I'm not sure we exactly figured it out, but
could they hear you in real time?
Yeah.
Or
there's like a half a millisecond, half a second delay.
That's what I mean, though. Yeah.
It was the talkback part that we're trying to figure out the communication part. But
oh yeah,
on the other end, they were like, "Yep, I hear it." So I'm diving into that, and I think it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah. I bring it up because buddy of mine, Derek Furman, who he's a producer. I did a bunch of work with him in New York. He moved out to LA and we did a session back in, I want to say March or April, and he had it. So he was able to hear me. And so we got sounds really quick.
Yep.
And then I just had my phone next to me and he would just text me after a take. And then a couple times we called on the phone. So we didn't do any kind of talk back like you're talking about, but yeah, he would just text me like, sounds great. Or like, oh, maybe less fills, more fill. Like it was so awesome.
Well, I mean, I almost always try to make sure that I let someone know, hey, the day I'm tracking, I'm going to start, 10:30 in the morning, whatever.
Yeah.
You're going to be around, I'll send you a track in like an hour, whatever. Because the worst thing to me is 24 hours later, somebody going like, hey, I don't really love the kick drum sound. And I'm like, dude, I got other things I got to move on to. Or especially a part thing. So I always try to make sure that's happening. It's a little, I feel like most people I work with, that's just that's kind of their norm too.
Yeah.
When you doing this, I want to know. But then, I'm finding also, I think with what you're saying is like, there's some people with less experience doing this more right now.
Yes.
And, I've had a situation where like I send something back to somebody and I don't hear from them for a week and they're like, hey, no, I really wanted it kind of more like, and I'm like, man, like,
yeah, it's
pretty hard for me to get back to that now. And I was hoping for feedback, like within the day.
Yeah, I mean, because, and also like to speak to that, because I'm not in my own studio all the time, I usually try to book 2 days in a row. So if there is a total meltdown, I can maybe come back to it the next day and have stuff relatively set up. But yeah, it's tough. Because we're all just trying to do, I obviously want to, I did a session for my buddy yesterday, I sent it and he was like, great.
Yep.
No notes. And like, that's always the goal.
Yeah.
And it's a new world, right? I feel like I got pretty comfortable being a session musician
Yep.
in the last 5 years, just in terms of going to studios and working for people and knowing how to read the room.
Yep.
And I honestly never, I wouldn't say I never thought I could, but I wasn't imagining myself now putting on like an engineer hat of now I am the engineer. And
Right.
that's kind of brings me back to like that thing that Chris Shaw told me. It's just, it's how deep am I going to go into this? And do I want to go, how far do I want to go? And how far do I need to go that I can feel confident sending files to any level of
Right.
artist?
Right. Well, I think we had, especially in the 90s, you had no idea that this, number one, really could be a thing or would be a thing, that, almost any musician at this point, but especially drummers, also need to be competent engineers.
Yeah.
And, I still look at real engineers and I'm like, wow, man, like, I don't know anything,
Yep.
I mean, I think I'm pretty good at what I do, but when I really look at a lot of guys, I'm like, I'm like at the 2 percentile of knowing what I'm doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it became a necessity,
Yeah.
like I saw it out here when I was recording in real studios a lot around 2005, 2006, 2007. And then starting to see like, this is really changing now.
Yeah.
In my head, I was like, man, I want to have a career as a studio drummer. I love playing live. I do love touring, but I really love being in a studio.
Yeah.
I need to create this for myself. And it's weird, for a long time, I felt like an imposter, like I'm not really a session drummer or blah, blah,
Yep.
blah. And then the tide has changed, especially dramatically in the last 4 months, but the tide slowly began to change where like, no, this is almost a necessity.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm still, I got over the imposter session musician thing a while ago, but I'm kind of, I see guys like you and a handful of other guys on Instagram, and I'm like, oh, I feel like that in terms of the engineering side, but I think it's kind of the way you build confidence is just doing it over and over. I learn something new with every session I do in terms of how I'm sending files, or just it's like practice. It's like anything. It's just doing it over and over and remembering, oh, I patched the snare drum differently this time, and I really noticed a difference. And I might not have heard that difference 6 months ago, but now I can. And like, oh, I flipped the phase on the kick, and I think I had it wrong the last 2 sessions. Maybe that's maybe that's why I was chasing my tail. So like stuff like that is still.
Yeah, there's no fast track to this.
Yeah.
And when when I'm giving kind of like lessons to people, I'm like, man, it just takes a long time. We're dealing with so many elements. Your drums have to sound the way you want them to sound for the track.
Yeah.
Often that's the first obstacle, is like, if you're not there yet, understanding tonality within your acoustic environment, then forget it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a whole other rabbit hole. It's just like sounds. And, I have a good amount of gear here. I have a practice space a couple of blocks away where I have a bunch of other gear. So I'm able to kind of swap out stuff pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
But, there's those handful of drums that work on almost every song. And I tend to start with those just because they have a track record. And then from there, it's, okay, when can I use this 12-inch snare? That's really fun. Like, oh, this might be a good opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think there's something else that I see that's really intriguing for me about your playing, is that you're a heavy hitter, in the studio.
Yeah.
And, you know, my progression over a long time has been hitting lighter and lighter. And
Yeah.
you're a real like bottom up player, and you really make it work.
Oh,
And
thanks.
it's part of your sound and your style. And it's super cool to see. You know, for me, it's like I almost like it's like I feel the weight of your playing, even through like fucking Instagram. You know what I
Right.
mean? I'm like,
Yeah.
that dude like laying into it.
Yeah.
But you've developed an internal balance the right way.
I mean, thank you. And it's still something, you know, that's still an ongoing thing. You know, it's like I look back to footage of me in the studio a couple years ago, and I'm just, you know, I'm hitting the way I would live.
Mhm.
And that doesn't really work, especially with cymbals. You know, cymbals have been really just that learning of when you hit a it's like a muscle memory that I've had to learn. Like when I'm going to hit the cymbal, I have to hold up a bit, you know,
Mhm.
but have it not affect the way I'm playing and have it sound obvious. Cause that also sounds bad too. If you're kind of digging in to the snare and hi-hat, I feel like you can dig into snare and hi-hat a little bit more than you can cymbals in a recording environment.
Mhm.
And there's definitely recordings where I can hear myself hit the cymbal light, and that also sounds bad.
Yeah, you can't sound tentative.
You know,
You got to hit it
and
like you mean it.
so
Yeah.
and a lot of and then it's also like, okay, where am I putting the mics, and what setup is going to sound right for me to be able to hit the drums with some force but not kill you with cymbals. And also, I mean, you're probably finding this too, like so many of the producers I'm working for, I'm doing all the cymbals after the fact.
Mm.
You know, I'm doing hi-hat and snare and toms and kick.
Mhm.
And honestly, for a lot of the stuff I'm doing now, which is there's so much of this electronic hybrid stuff, I'll very often give people an option without kick. So it's just snare, hi-hat, and toms. If I think there's a good chance you're gonna, you know, if I'm playing along to programming that's super busy, like you can get away without doing the kick and either use samples or go in after the fact. It sometimes really saves everybody's mind in terms of editing, you know,
Mm.
because it's one thing if a snare flams a little bit with programming, like a clap, that's cool usually. But you know, if you're really playing with, like, if someone sends you a track and the programming is there to stay,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of kick stuff in there, yes, I mean, I try to, you know, the other option is maybe playing a kick pattern that's half as busy as the programmed kick. You
Mhm.
know, so maybe you're playing on the 1 and 3 if there's a syncopated bass drum part, you know, like stuff like that.
So you're using that often for a sonic element, or
It's a little of both.
stay out of the way?
It's kind of like, okay, if you know you want this very programmed beat in your song, but you also want to have me play on top of it, I feel like you're going to get plenty of energy if I play everything but the kick. That's going to kind of tick the box of having a live feel on it,
Mhm.
you know, but especially if it's like a 4 on the floor thing.
Mhm.
I mean,
This is going to be Flam City, right?
well, it's either that or it's like, I mean, we're talking about an imaginary song right now, but, you know, if there's already like a pretty cool program kick that is going to stay in the song,
Right.
it's going to be hard to even replicate that with a real kick drum. So it's almost like, why bother?
Right. Fight it. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's the approach to, that's the end all be all approach, but I found that works a lot. And it also kind of, the second you're playing a drum kit without the kick drum, it totally opens up your mind. You know, it's one less thing to have to think about. It's one less thing to have to coordinate. It's pretty, it can be kind of freeing and just kind of change your mental perception of like, what should I play on this? You know, maybe I should just play the rim of this tom and a snare. Maybe I just play a hi-hat, you know. I personally make a lot of electronic music myself that I put out through these audio libraries. So I'm always kind of finding what's a really fun way to combine electronic and acoustic drums.
Right. So you start to play as if you are programmed, but
Well, it's that, but it's kind of approaching the drum set like a percussion instrument, like treating the electronic kit as the drummer, and then you're going to kind of fit in along with it.
right.
And like what are the easiest things to stay out of the way with is like maybe don't play the kick, maybe not play any cymbals, or you could do like, maybe you're doing snare and hi-hat for one track and then just toms and cymbals on another track, and you're just
right.
right. I don't know.
So okay, I got like 3 questions I want to try to remember to get back to you. One, do you sometimes actually, so you're saying if this is usually when somebody sends you a demo that has the programming and then you take this approach, do you sometimes program your own kick and then take this approach?
You like sending it to somebody?
No, just for like tracking purposes. You're like, okay, I think this should have a programmed kick sound, or this is really the right sound for this, and then work around that. Do you do that ever on your own, or is it usually because somebody sends you something, they're like, yes, this programming is part of the track, and that changes your approach to
Right. Yeah, if it's usually in terms of drum programming, it's usually for projects of my own. So I think to answer your question is I probably wouldn't program a kick unless somebody asked for it.
kind of guided toward that.
Yeah, it's more on the examples I'm thinking of is, like if I'm going to play on kind of a more rock tune, but they know they want to have this particular drum loop in a bunch of the song. And so, I'll give them options with kick, but say, I'm also going to give you an option without the kick, which might make everyone's life easier when it comes time to edit it.
Gotcha.
Because that's the other question is if someone is sending me if someone is sending me something that they know they're going to try to get on the radio or like that kind of scope, and there's definitely there might even be like programmed real drums, and they just want some of that energy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to assume that they will take whatever I give them and edit it to that timing.
Right.
But some people, I think they're not looking for that. I think they think like your job is to get the timing right because you're the person I'm hiring.
Mm-hmm.
So there have been a few cases where someone sends me a very programmed thing, wants live drums over it, but it's very clear to me it's going to need a lot of editing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll reach out and say, hey, like what are we doing here? Like, do you want me? I can edit it a bit, which I don't mind doing sometimes. It's obviously time consuming, but there's been a few times where I just go ahead and do it and say, hey, I've sent you a version with it edited and not, because my fear is if this is a person I haven't worked with and they throw in the files, their first song is gonna be like, this sounds like shit.
Right.
So yeah, it's
depends on the approach. I mean, so this kind of leads into my other question is, sometimes when there's a programmed kick drum that you think might be there, are you trying to match that tone, or are you going to go for something kind of opposite so they work together? I mean, of course that's going to vary on song to song. But.
That's if someone sends me their garage drum program, like I find that they send me a track and they're like, oh, and I made like a little garage band demo drum track, but obviously do your thing. It's always like, oh, do your thing. But I also know that they've been listening to that for probably 2 months, and they have this imaginary perception that once I hire the pro studio drummer, they're going to do this thing I never thought of that's going to make it better.
Right.
But what tends to happen is the second you stray from the thing they've been listening to for 2 months, there's a part of them that kind of freaks out.
Right.
So I definitely always try to do a very verbatim, even if they say they're gonna not use the part. I always try to do like my version of their thing.
Cool. Yeah.
And that's usually trying to get sounds that I think are appropriate for the song and being a human. And I mean, I love to mess around with my kit and make it sound not like a human,
Mm-hmm.
but I find I'm not doing a lot of that unless people really are saying just go all in. And then it's fun. Then it's like, okay, cool, I'm going to run my kit through some guitar pedals, and
Mm-hmm.
then that's where I have the most fun, is doing, like, creating. I look at guys like you and or like Aaron Sterling, and like getting these real, like, I mean, engineer, like, I think you're a great engineer. I think your stuff sounds super pro. And I still kind of get intimidated by that, and I'm personally more comfortable getting a sound that has a lot of character and vibe that never existed before, because then I'm not hung up on, like, oh, is this the right kick drum sound? If I make something that just sounds awesome, it doesn't matter if the sound is right, because it's never existed before.
Right. I mean, I definitely think you have that, no doubt. You know what I mean? I mean, you definitely have. I mean, I also often, when I'm hearing your stuff, there's a crunchy element to it. There's an electronic element to it.
Yeah.
And then of course, just your playing style is inherent in that thing.
Yeah.
Well,
that's my comfort zone. I'm kind of obsessed with distortion. And I think a lot of it is because we're on our phones so much, I want to watch back. If I'm going to record something, film it, and do audio and all, when I watch it back on my phone, I want it to sound good coming out of my phone.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously it needs to sound good on speakers and headphones, but
there's a mix element that's very important.
Yeah, it's like, I don't want it to sound great everywhere, and then you put on your phone, it sounds like shit. It's because the reality is people are listening to music out of their laptops, their phones.
Mm-hmm.
I want it to sound good everywhere. So
what's your favorite way? What are your favorite ways to get distortion?
I mean, I love the Sound Toys stuff. Devil Lock Deluxe, Decapitator.
Yep.
About a year, maybe 2 years ago, I got the Yamaha EAD 10 mic.
Okay.
Have you messed around with that at all?
I haven't. I'm going to start writing this stuff down. So, I'm not texting. I'm writing some of this.
Yeah. Yamaha came out with this mic that you clip onto the hoop of your kick drum.
Okay.
So it's basically in the area you'd put like that kind of crotch mic.
Yep.
It's like it's literally like right above your it's on your hoop right above the beater.
Okay.
And it's a stereo mic, and it's basically a tool that you can use to quickly record yourself. It's great for practicing because it has an in, so you can put your iPhone into it and play along with records and dial yourself in. Okay. It has a bunch of scenes which are kind of fun and cheesy. It's almost like it almost turns your kit into a V drum. Like, V drums, you can put like arena rock, yeah, or all these templates. Okay. But the first thing I realized when I got it, it has 2 1/4 inches out, and I was like, oh, I could run this into all my guitar pedals and my loop pedals. Mm-hmm. And it gets a really quick, immediate sound. And so I've had this Chaos pad that I've been using for years, and the distortion on the Chaos pad is currently my favorite distortion. Oh, wow. It just has this, I don't know, it just kind of does it for me. It what I really like about distortion is it adds these overtones to your drums, mm-hmm, that start sounding more like pitches and tones and a melody. Mm-hmm. So it's like, if I the Chaos pad is really fun to make loops with because it has a BPM setting. Mm-hmm. So you can really quickly make it has four channels, like 4 tracks, and you can really quickly make loops that are super steady in a BPM, like a set rate, which is just really helpful because I'm doing a lot of production stuff. And like before I was using the Line 6 DL4 for looping, which is really fun, but then you're going in and chopping it up. And but yeah, so I would say top distortion right now is that. And I also have these pedals by Big Ear. They make one called the Chaka, which I don't think they make anymore, but it has a distortion, and it also has an octave up pedal.
Oh, wow.
Or octave up button, which gets really crazy. Oh, and
different than a whammy pedal sound.
It's different because you can only use it once the drive is engaged. So it's always distortion and then octave up distortion.
Oh, wow. Okay. Cool.
So the whammy is just literally an octave. And then the last answer to your question is the Platform by Electro Harmonics. It's a really awesome pedal because it has it's a compression pedal, but it also has a drive button.
Okay.
So you can do all the fun compression stuff, and then you can add distortion to that. You can add drive to it, but what's great is it has a drive level, so you can kind of fade in the level of distortion. It also has a tone knob, so then you can roll off kind of the top end, so you can get it really compressed, and put up the drive a lot, but then roll off kind of the high, like it kind of rolls the highs off, so you can get this really like mid, really dark kind of drive sound, and that thing is awesome.
So are you doing this after tracking usually, or during tracking, so you can hear it? And then how are you dealing with sending this to clients?
Most of the pedal stuff I'm doing in the moment through the EAD 10 pedal.
Okay.
And that's usually, it's like an options thing.
Okay.
That if I'm sending to people.
So it could be gone and have a totally clean tone.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's more like and honestly, I'm using it more for the stuff I make for myself.
Sure.
For Instagram videos or music I'm making.
Right. I find too, most of the super, super fun, crazy stuff is not for real music.
Right. But there's been times where I bring my pedal board and the EAD 10 to sessions, and there's always that part of the session where like, yeah, man, I don't know, let's just try something crazy. And I'm like, oh, well, why don't we run my drums through a pedal board? And what I love about that EAD 10 pedal is, for years, I just didn't really know how to run stuff through pedals without getting feedback or having to go through, having to go through like my Apollo, but then come back out and then go back in, and then there's latency. The sound of the EAD is so immediate and just kind of, it's a stereo mic, so it's getting the whole kit. It's getting a lot of the kick attack and a lot of the bottom snare from where it's located. So the second you compress that, it already has this great vibe. So once you start adding effects to that, it's just real. It's almost like a contact mic. It's just a real immediate sound. And
okay. Right. So EAD 10 mic is stereo, you said.
Yes, it has a mono option.
Okay, too. Because most pedals are not stereo.
Right.
But so I would say 9 times out of 10 you're running that mono.
Yeah. What's great about the Chaos Pad is it is stereo.
Right.
And then
this one, the Mini.
Cool. Yeah. And then the Electro Harmonics one I have is a stereo. So I do have a few pedals where I can keep the stereo intact. I also have that Electro Harmonics the Hazarai Memory Man,
Mm.
and that's stereo. So
How is that different than the regular Memory Man?
it's just kind of like a newer one. It doesn't look as cool. I don't know. It's
Okay. Oh, is it
um,
smaller one?
yeah, it's blue.
Yes. Okay.
And it has like a loops. It has a weird way you can loop stuff,
Okay.
but
you get the same vibes. You get the Memory Man.
yeah, what I really like about it is there's a few different settings on it. It's more like it's these longer delays. It's like 1 to 3 second delays. So it's kind of cooler versions of like I don't know, reverb is such a touchy thing because it's like if reverb doesn't sound really, I don't know how to say it. It just whenever I'm looking for space, I try to use it through I like to use delays to create space rather than reverbs. Because I feel like unless you're using a legit like reverb chamber or like the best reverbs, they just kind of sound, I don't know. It's just a more inspiring sound to me if I can get a cool atmosphere using a longer delay. And it's just it kind of brings me back to I'm just looking for character and something that kind of sounds like it's its own thing. So you're not trying to match like, oh, what's the correct reverb sound or
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on reverb?
Well, I think it can be dating. It can date your track immediately. I have noticed though, surprisingly, that even a touch of reverb, like on the snare send, when it's almost not audible, but it's in there. It's like, oh, I think there's a lot more reverb happening in tracks than I ever knew.
Yep.
Because it does do a thing where it opens it up, even though it's almost non-detectable.
Yeah.
I also am afraid of it though,
Yep.
for that reason, especially, like I was saying earlier, it's like sometimes I send something to a client and I really clarify like, hey, that reverb you hear, that can be gone. So you're not stuck with that. Because I think that could be a turnoff immediately. But I also find that like, especially with the Sound Toy stuff, you can really get great ambience through the delays because there's no actual reverb in there.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Those are my favorite sounds. And also a Memory Man, ping pong delay or Memory Man, just those kind of things, they add a dimension.
Yeah.
That is super vibey.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. It's like, unless you have a great, incredible plate reverb plugin or a real one or whatever.
Yeah.
Because those always seem to fit. Like a great classic plate reverb can fit into a lot of things.
Yep. Yeah, I'm more likely to a thing I like to do on almost everything I do for myself, and I'll usually send it as like you were saying, like a 2 mix to a client, is the Echo Boy Junior Sound Toys, the Echoplex setting in there. I'll put on like I usually have a mono overhead as well, and I'll just do a little bit of slapback, just like slightly buried on the mono overhead, and it just if I'm kind of like if I'm just not feeling something of my own playing, if I add just a little bit of slapback, I just love it. I don't know. There's something about adding just a little bit more of a tail to the drum.
But it's almost indetectable, right?
Right. It's something that like people would think, oh, let me put reverb on that snare. It's that idea of wanting the sound to last longer, but I don't know. And also it adds a slight bit of rhythm to it. Like I tend to do it more of a slap, like a 16th slap back, or, I just like, I'm always looking for ways to create texture and movement,
Are you going to duplicate your mono track then to do that? Or you just put it on?
It's more like I'm putting it on to get the vibe right.
Yeah.
And then I'll most likely turn it off if I'm sending it to somebody, but maybe let them know that's what I did.
Right. Right.
Because most people, like I said, I just for who I've been working with, I tend to send stuff pretty dry, just because I know they have their asses covered.
Yeah.
They know what they want. But I'm making a lot of music for myself and for companies, so it's like that's kind of my go-to when I'm mixing.
Yeah.
It's like the times to like decide, when am I the engineer, when am I the mixer, when am I just the drummer, which is always changing
All the time. Yeah. So okay, let's talk about your moving your drums into the vocal booth.
Yes.
When I learned that Chad Blake records, his drums in a vocal booth, I was like, oh, okay. Big room, like nobody needs a big room if Chad Blake can do what he does.
Yep.
Do you find that, so you said you're doing a lot of stuff separate, cymbals separately. Do you still find in the vocal booth, because it's so dry, that that's still a necessity, or that really helps you to be able to do things together?
The cymbal separately thing is really just if somebody asks for it, or maybe I'll offer it.
Okay.
I'll say getting the M160 mic really just made my life easier in terms of getting the cymbals to not hurt my ears.
Mm-hmm. So that's your mono overhead?
Yep.
Okay.
I use that mono, and then the way we have it right now in my vocal booth, we have the Coles kind of to the side, just slightly in back of me.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So it's kind of more like they're picking up, because the room isn't that big, so they're picking up the sides of the kit, and so I think the guy, the engineer here, who set up the drums in the room. I just kind of went along with it, but he was saying he got the idea from Steve Albini. I guess he puts his stuff pretty wide, slightly in back, Coles, and I mean, I thought it was unorthodox, but I also don't know. I just kind of go along with what sounds good, and it gives a nice stereo picture of the kit. Have the M160 right above, and it's really just it's a lot of it is really self-mixing. It's not hitting, maybe putting a little bit of I never put tape on my cymbals, but putting a little bit of tape on your ride cymbals sometimes can really help.
Yeah.
It's getting more stick definition, not a ton of just like that overall like never ending like buildup of a rumble of the cymbal.
Quicker decay to get out of the way of
your
toms or whatever. Yeah.
I mean, I'm usually only using one crash at a time, 99% of the time, just in terms of like how much space we have in the vocal booth. And I find it's just, I don't know. It's that people don't really like a lot of cymbals in music anymore, it seems. So,
or drum fill.
Yeah. Well, I feel like the drum fill is coming back. I've been getting a lot of, give me like 10 fill options throughout the song.
Right. Okay.
But it could just be the fill. So like their mindset is there's gonna be the beat, and then they'll just go through a library of fills and throw those in, or
right.
Maybe even put them over the beat, like I don't know, like Jeff Lynne or something. Who knows?
Right. Right.
Which is a cool vibe. I remember the first time I heard like that, like the Traveling Wilburys stuff, and growing up with that stuff and not analyzing it. And then, once I started to understand a little bit more about music and listening back and be like, oh, all the fills are happening and the beat is never stopping.
Yeah.
I just remember just being like, wait, you're allowed to do that? That doesn't make any sense.
Those are pretty genius recordings. Obviously the songs are incredible, but the sonics of those, even, at that age, which was like, my mid to late teenage years when those came out, was like, well, these sound different.
Well, apparently the story is like, have you heard some of the stories about how they did that? Where like they'd have all the guys sit around one mic, everyone playing acoustic guitars, and record like the 5 acoustic guitars like around one mic. That would kind of be like the foundation of the track.
Huh.
And then it kind of build on top of it. Was just like it kept building on top of layers.
Wow.
Um,
That's amazing to put those guys right, because that would make sense. Those guys are so, you know, to capture their vibe in that way, and especially them playing together, like that's pretty great. So there was the program beat already, and they would just had headphones on and they were strumming along to it.
yeah, I think they were saying like Jim Kellner would play on. Like they had a mic because they were like in a house. I think they set up a recording studio in one of their houses.
Okay.
And they were setting up mics like in the kitchen, and he was playing on pots and pans as kind of like a guide rhythm. And then they'd all be recording those acoustics. And then I think then they went to a studio and started layering on the drum set and like I don't know. I watched this documentary about it maybe 15 years ago, so it's kind of foggy, but I remember just hearing those stories and being like, oh, like you're allowed to do that, you know?
Right. That's a producer who knows how to capture, well, personalities and vibes, right? It's like totally different approach. It's not like, all right, we're gonna take Bob Dylan and try to fit him into this box, like.
Right. But it's also a good example of, I feel like all my bands would always record demos at like our friend's basement or something. And then you go to the studio and you're trying to chase this energy of the demo.
Mm-hmm.
And we live in an age now where you can save all your elements to a demo, and those elements could then make it into the final song, and you can pick and choose what do you want to record, but you don't have to re-record everything just because it's a demo.
Right. You're kind of sparking my memory on when Yankee Hotel Foxtrot came out, the Wilco record.
Yep.
And how that record morphs through all kinds of different sonic layers and vibes and things like that. And my recollection is, I think they would actually record the song, but just all different ways. They would like,
right.
But then I think they put them together sometimes. Like,
right,
we're going to use this recording of the song, but that's now going to be the second verse or whatever.
Yeah, and that's kind of goes to like the point of when someone sends me their scratch drum idea. Like yesterday, the session I did yesterday, the singer, he must have done it on his iPhone. He recorded a track of him playing on like a table or something just to give me an idea of the rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working on the track for a couple hours, and now I'm adding real drums playing that rhythm, but I was kind of missing that texture. So I found these little like this company Upcycled Percussion.
Yep.
I have this little like rattler they made. It's a bunch of poker chips.
Yep.
And I just kind of put that up to the overhead, and I did a similar kind of rhythm to his guide rhythm.
Yep.
Because the more I listened to the song, I was missing that rhythm that he did. And I was like, well, there's a good chance he's going to miss it too, but not realize it.
Right.
And, there's always something to be said about your first idea. I always try to make sure I'm recording and ready to go the first time I play through something, because something's going to come out.
Right. I think there's some of those elements in your solo record too, where I don't remember the tune, but there's some like a hand clap part in there. And those ideas that sound, and this is exactly what we're talking about, like blending the acoustic and electronic thing. There's modular stuff happening, but then there's a very obvious kind of like almost lo-fi hand clap thing that's a totally different dimension.
Yeah. I think that was that was the kind of thing where I probably made that hand clap like a very digitalized kind of corny sounding one, Ableton, and I thought, I was like, oh, there's already so many layers of perfect sounding samples and electronic stuff. I'm really into the idea of just let's replace those with something that maybe would sound puny and lame on its own, but then I think I was listening to a lot of James Blake when that when I was working on that, when I was making that song. I think you're talking about a song of mine called "When Will Today Be Tomorrow."
Yes, that's it. Yep.
But because that was, that was a song I probably started in like 2014.
Okay.
But the early James Blake records before he started singing were all instrumental.
Mm-hmm.
And he has some really amazing tracks where it was just a really simple beat, as simple as a piano, and just kind of one hand clap that sounds like he probably recorded it on, a field recording mic or something. It just sounds like the clap is like someone's clapping next to your ear.
Mm.
And I remember that standing out to me, just like, oh, like something so simple, like, oh, like the idea that not everything has to be so professional to have a vibe and make you excited. It doesn't have to be recorded in like this amazing recording studio with this amazing mic to have a feeling that inspires you and that makes you feel something.
That's something I love about like Spoon records.
Oh my God. I
Especially
love those records. Every sound.
Right. Like
Yeah.
when Kill the Moonlight came out, which I think was 2003. And that first tune, it's like whirly bass, vocals, and tambourine, I think. And the way that's arranged, and when the tambourine comes in, you're like, that's all it needs. It's a huge energy lift.
Yeah.
In every song, they've minimized it, but everything is so important.
Yeah.
And again, it's not always a pristine thing. Sometimes it's shitty on purpose.
Yeah. Well, it's texture, right? Like when I think of Spoon, I think of texture. Like every song, every acoustic guitar, every layer just has, it's just like a lot of attack, a lot of grain. I don't know. It's I'm trying to find the right word. I don't know. Texture is the word that comes to mind. And that's kind of what I look for in terms of like when I'm recording myself and feeling good about a drum sound that I like. I want it to texture and attack are kind of my that's what I'm going for first. And then obviously tone and like low end and stuff. But I think that just that's where the excitement is for me. It's just if I can get like something like to snap, feel good, feel immediate, kind of like that iPhone test I was saying. That's kind of like I would say that's kind of the sound that I feel the most comfortable trying to get. And just like that's like this, they're a great example of just like the sound. Like it's just there's always enough things that aren't perfect in all those songs. There's always, you could tell that they were like, oh, let's just leave that on at the end, or that's my favorite thing is getting the core of what is needed in terms of sounds and layers, and then just capturing personality, which is the hardest thing to do, right? Like once you've done a take 10 times, it's like saying the word hello. If you say hello 50 times, by the 50th time, your brain will kind of be like, what are you doing? Right. So it's like, it's really capturing, how do you capture the energy of a song in 3 takes, but also have all the parts right? And I don't know. It's that's the kind of, that's where I don't know. That's the endless, the endless thing to obtain is how to do that. But
right. Have you been in the studio with Mike Snow at all, or is that just a touring thing?
That's mostly been a touring thing. I was in a band with Andrew, their singer.
Okay.
So we were in a band called Fires of Rome from, I want to say 2007 to 2009. Okay. And I remember being in the studio with him and him playing me Animal from that record. Yeah. It's like, oh, I'm doing this new, he called it a side project. He's like, oh, I'm doing this new side project with these 2 producers. Okay. And I remember him playing me Animal. And meanwhile, like we're in the studio, like working on our record. And I look at him, I'm like, you realize this is going to be your new all the time band. I mean, he's a producer, songwriter. So like he was always kind of doing a bunch of stuff at once. Yep. So like our band was like this kind of like indie glam thing, which is fun. But I just remember hearing that record and being like, this isn't a new side project. Like, this is going to be
Okay.
huge.
Right.
And yeah, we were supposed to do some recording for their, I don't know. I don't know if it's a newer record or something. It kind of like scheduling fell through. They record most of their stuff in Sweden, I think.
Right. Right.
And I remember talking to Pontus about his setup, and I think most of the drum recording they have on their record is usually just one mic. It's that kind of like Mark Ronson world of just, like emulating that like 60s, 70s, one mic drum sound, breakbeat thing.
Yep.
And yeah, all the guys in that band are monster producers, monster songwriters. They get great sounds, great ideas. I could do a whole separate podcast on playing that gig because it was super intricate with playing loops, like triggering loops for Ableton, and it was a amazing experience just because I was such a fan of all those songs. So to play them live was really just awesome.
It was pretty involved, pretty heavy, like intricate.
Yeah, I mean the quick thing is the quick version of it is every section of a song is an endless loop that the drummer who I was subbing for controls. So what's great about that is if you want to have a intro, stay on that part for a while, you get to the bridge, you want to bring it down, and separate parts are going to other people who are controlling MIDI levels of stuff, but
Wow.
the drummer is in control of changing the sections of the song on an SPDS, which goes to an Ableton. So best case scenario, it sounds like I'm playing with tracks, but worst case scenario, I miss a section or cue a section too early. And then on the fly, you have to reset that section and you're playing the drums.
Sure. Yep.
So it was the kind of thing which was a learning experience, and honestly, like the drums were kind of secondary to the choreography of learning what part happens when. And but
I did after like that also, with Melissa Etheridge, oddly enough, but she made one record where it was like pretty that heavy, and I was like, she's not somebody that wants to stick to an arrangement totally, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I was like, how am I going to do this? And I had one pad that was like, it was the song, it was the loops in the sections in the definitive arrangement.
Yes.
And I was like, nah, I need to have like,
if
we're going to go 4 more bars, this loop has got to go that. She didn't want to be tied to that. She was like, if we're going to do this, I don't want to be tied.
Yeah.
Like, okay, cool. I'll figure it out. And
no, it's a great concept. It's the kind of thing that I ideally would have set it up. So it's like, I know, learning somebody else's setup of that system on a pad, and learning a 2-hour show. It was kind of a balls to the wall. Like, all right, like you're going to really, and, after like 2 shows, I allowed myself to finally like bring a beer up on stage and have like 2 sips, but
only 2 shows. That's pretty good, man.
Yeah. Maybe it's 3 or 4, but yeah, I mean, the first few, and honestly, then it was way easier because I was like, I can't drink before I play. Like, not that I'm like chugging whiskey well, I do sometimes, but I found that once I had that beer, it calmed me a lot. And because I was so freaked out to drink anything, that was actually making it worse. Or if I just had like a beer, it would have probably calmed me down a little bit.
Rain off a little in a good way.
Yeah. I don't know.
Tell me about your like electronic setup. So it sounds like you use SPD into Ableton if you want to record that way.
It depends. I was doing that when I was doing like easy drummer stuff.
Okay.
Just so I could have something to play on. I have a Behringer, I think it's called the RD8. It's their version of the 808, the like classic 808 that came out about a year ago. I really love the Volca beats.
Okay.
Like the Korg Volca little guys. They make like a drum one, a synth one, a bass synth one.
Okay.
But they make this. They have one called the Volca Beats, and it's literally like this big,
Okay.
and it's just a really fun little drum machine.
Okay.
So I'll run through that. I'll run that through pedals, and then I make a lot of stuff just in Ableton.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't do a ton of SPDS stuff into stuff unless I'm on a gig that needs it.
Right. Okay. So you're
Yeah.
not trying to play live into Ableton so much. You'll
Not too often. And honestly, like for most gigs that have a bunch of, and I've talked about this like on other podcasts, but like most gigs, if it is very track heavy, I say, hey man, like leave those tracks in and let me just figure out what do we want to take out if we can. Like maybe let me play real kick and real snare. But I mean, I know there's a ton of guys on gigs now covering drums and programming with triggers and SPDSs. And at a certain point, I feel like as an audience member, I don't know. I think the audience wants to know I think if the audience is watching you do something, they want to have an idea of what you're actually doing. And watching someone play a pad, I don't know if it's not the same thing as watching someone hit this drum and that cymbal. Because when I'm hitting a pad, who the hell knows what I'm doing up there, right?
Right.
So I don't know. I tend to say, hey, if that part's going to be in there, let's leave it in, and maybe I'll double it on the hi-hat or with a rim or a percussion thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think like as a live viewer, that's more interesting. And then sometimes people are like, no, like, fuck you, play this on the SPDS. And I say, you got it.
Right. Well, there's a certain element of probably the type of gig. So if it's an uber pop gig, big artist, you're often repeating things verbatim, right?
Yes.
Sonically, parts, and then the element, element there's a whole different visual element for audience members, costumes, lights, things like that. But I think maybe what you're referring to is people who are there. I don't want to sound like a snob, but they're more for the music and the vibes of the musicians and that organic feeling of like, okay, I see what that guy's doing.
Right.
There's that element is connecting differently than costumes and things. And I'm not taking away from that stuff. I'm just
no.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause sometimes your job as a drummer it's a little bit more of an employee. Right. And then sometimes your job as a drummer is you're an artist.
Yes.
And they can be mutually exclusive, or like they can be separate and they can also like connect. But I kind of imagine if you're a drummer on, I don't know, who's a random pop star. I don't want to say anybody like
careful
drummer. Yeah, I know. But it's like if there was
I think what we're saying is right. We're not taking away from musicianship of that drummer. It's a great gig. It's a great gig. Like Adam Marcello plays with Katy Perry.
I was going to say Katy Perry. Then I was like, well, I know Adam.
Adam's fantastic drummer.
Oh yeah.
And he does that job well. And I've talked with him a little bit about like, hey, he had put something up like, I don't know, not that long ago on Instagram, and he was kind of explaining something and programming things and things. I hit him up, was like, hey, are you intricately involved in that part of it? And he's like, oh yeah. I didn't really know. And man, that is a whole side of well, both being an employee and I mean, I think in his case you could say artistic part, because he's so integral to knowing that stuff and helping that show run smoothly that you could say that's part of his style.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I think the part I was trying to make is if say I got the Katy Perry gig, and it was a case where there's a musical director and they're telling you, oh, yeah, this part you play on the SPDS. Like it's a show that's already built.
Right.
And they're like, oh, this part's on the SPDS, and that's just how we do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, great, that's what I will do for you.
Mm-hmm.
Where if Katy Perry's team came to me and said, hey, we're building up a show for her new record, how would you want to approach this?
Right.
Like, how do we cover these bases? Then it would be a little, okay, like, well, how much leeway do I have? Can I, you know, I don't know. I don't know if I got off. I don't even know where we started with this
No,
one. But,
I mean, I think, you know, my approach to a lot of gigs has always been, and I haven't been heavily in like electronic gigs so much, but coming from records where like I want to try to, in a live setting, recreate maybe not kick and snare sounds exactly, but I want to help change a sonic zone for the listener, whether they know, whether they're aware of it or not, but something happens where, okay, something as simple as having, you know, snare changes, low snare, high snare, side snare that I can put different elements on.
Yep.
Like simple things like that are so huge to me, you know, expressing myself, but also trying to feel like I'm representing a song.
Oh, totally.
In a live setting. And it's become way more sophisticated because of SPD and things like that. But it was always a goal with me, even in the early 2000s when I was, you know, when I was playing with Alanis and we were just running an MPC and that had a loop. But it was like, at a minimum, I'm going to have a side snare. So when I'm playing a loop part, it's not the main snare. I mean, and it's just gotten, you know, times 100 since then.
Yeah, I'm definitely more in the camp of I want to try to find a way to accommodate the song within my means. Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, maybe I have a second hi-hat or a stack or something I can hit that kind of has a clap thing, but maybe we leave the claps in the sample, you know, maybe we leave the clap in the track too. Yeah, I know it's do
you find it more, do you find your brain overworking maybe because of studio being so deep in the studio thing? You're like, how am I going to do this live?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a perfect example is a project I can't talk about yet, but there's a new album done. We're going to work on the live show. Okay. And there's a lot of programming. There's a lot of real drums, and they sent me the record and they say, cool, like, do your thing. Mm-hmm. and we'll talk, you know, we'll start working it out.
Wow.
And which is exciting. And then, you know, I get the record and it sounds amazing and there's a lot of electronic stuff, but we're going to start with me trying to do a lot of it on a kit.
Cool.
Just for a live thing. But, you know, I also want to honor the sounds that they put a lot of time into. Mm-hmm. And as I'm talking about this, I haven't even begun to do it because it's overwhelming and I have some time to do it. But
right.
I think because I also make a lot of electronic music, I want to, it's a combination of, okay, I need to learn these parts. I want to get sounds that kind of work. I can put some stuff on pads, but kind of like I was saying, what's going to be more interesting if I'm triggering the sound that has kind of a snare and a white noise thing, or maybe if I actually have a snare, but I have like a cutout cymbal on it and I can kind of do that and it's covering a similar sound, but is a little more artistically satisfying to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I heard about that project you have with Johnny Cash and the electronic record, and it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, that's he's back. Who knew?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's why you can't talk about it yet. So, yeah.
I saw, I think it was you. I'm pretty sure I saw you post, just speaking of going back for a second, you were talking about distortions. Mm-hmm. I think I saw you post a video using something called Dirt.
Yeah, it's a Native Instruments plugin.
And I saw that Brian Schubel commented on it. And I just wanted to say I met Brian. Brian worked on a record I did in 2005 with my band The Exit. We did like 1 week out in LA, and then stuff kind of fell apart with the producer that we were using, and we ended up coming back to New York. But I remember I was such a fan of his because I was so into the Fiona Apple stuff. And I haven't talked to him since, but I just wanted to at one point mention to you that I saw that, and I don't know how well you know Brian, but I was just really excited to see. I just hadn't thought of him in a minute.
Yeah.
And I was excited to, I'm going to reach out to him.
Yeah.
But I haven't yet, but I don't know if he will remember me, but I was just really excited to see his name. And just, you had mentioned we would talk about at some point, like engineers that we're inspired by. And I don't know why I just thought that up, but
yeah, I haven't worked with Brian that much, a handful of times over a bunch of years. And I'm assuming Brian's like this with everybody, but there's a certain connection that you're like, this guy's rad. He's a super cool dude.
Yeah.
Easy to work with. Just, like in Drumland, it's like fun. And we message here and there, not often. Yeah, I've always had great vibes from Brian, and when I work with him,
Yeah, he did something where I think he put like a bullet mic kind of on the floor under the snare, and it picked up a lot of like the batter side of the kick and the snare. And I think he ran it through like a distortion pedal. And I remember it was just it was one of those things that stuck with me for years. It's like, oh man, like just the idea that you could just do weird stuff that isn't, I don't know, what you see pictures of,
Right.
you're, I don't know. I know it's a side.
Like those ideas that get ingrained of like, you would never have that idea as an acoustic drummer. And then somebody do that and you're like, whoa, that is so cool. How do I do that? How do I make that part of what I do?
Right.
I always had guitar player envy, like I've been fortunate to play with so many great guitar players who are creating like, sonic effects. And I was always like, I want to be able to do that, like on the fly.
Yep.
Like whether it's delay, whether it's distortion, whatever, like simple things. It's like, I want to be able to manipulate me like that.
Yeah. Hey man, check out that pedal or that EAD 10 mic, man. It might open some doors for you.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Cause I usually go through, I kind of landed on contact mics a lot through my pedals. Because they are more isolated. You can pinpoint them more to like, I'm just going to put this on the snare head or on the snare shell or on the hi-hat.
Yeah.
And then sometimes running two of them.
Yep.
It's kind of endless, and like, I talked to, I don't know if you know Justin Glasgow, but I talked to him yesterday and he has a pretty great setup going in his studio. And I was like, oh, that's inspiring. Like it inspired me to want to dial some certain things in here that make it a little more accessible, on the fly, and I also think that especially the pandemic thing, it's like some things I have like, okay, pedal board, I kind of have that half in between ready to go out the door, using in the studio. And I'm like, I haven't processed yet that I'm not going anywhere for a while.
Yes.
I should just have that here ready to go.
Yeah.
It's part of the rig,
Yeah. I mean, my dream, because I can't really do it still, is to have some place where I can have my drums set up all the time and just have all the toys set up, because every time I come here, I have to set up from scratch. And even my practice space, I share with other people. So I set up and tear down. So yeah, to have
the creativity though, in a certain way, you have to be able to know to get dialed in fairly quickly, right? You're going to have a limited amount of time.
Yeah.
Also the gear, like you said, a lot of it's shared. It is what it is, unless you're bringing in all your own shit.
Yeah.
But to be able to get to that place, relatively quickly, I think is super cool. And then work on those limitations and still be you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty cool approach and skill.
I mean, honestly, it's probably why I changed my setup so much is because I'm starting from scratch almost every time. So it's like, well, it's all in this corner. So might as well just, I don't know, my brain kind of, in the studio, I know what I need to just get the job done for a pretty just across the board recording. And it's usually just, it's basically the Ringo kit, it's like ride and crash and a couple toms. If somebody wants something a little like bigger and like really next level, I just, there's a couple of studios I'll just go to and have a buddy engineer and help me set up. If it's something that needs more than 10 mics, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it myself.
Okay.
And I'm happy. And I would rather take some money out of my end and go somewhere with a buddy who I work with, or trade a favor of playing on a friend's recording if they'll record me at a bigger room that has, I could set up like 3 room mics and have some distance.
Right. But 10 is kind of your max. You're like, okay, if I can't get it with this on my own.
I mean, honestly, I'm usually using 6 to 8 for most of the stuff I'm doing.
Cool.
I usually have 1 kick mic, top bottom snare, but I don't do hi-hat mic unless someone really wants it, just because the sound I get in the setting, I know you're going to hear plenty of hi-hat, but yeah, I mean, if someone wants it, I can make it happen.
Right.
And I also just assume if people want another level of that kind of options, they'll probably go to somebody else, but that could also change. That's probably the next step for me is deciding, do I want to expand that on my end?
Right.
Is there a need for that? Or am I kind of fitting a niche of someone who's looking for a character that my drumming brings, more so than having 10 to 12 mic options?
Yeah. Definitely two different approaches, both valid. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's interesting because I feel like I'm always morphing towards style. I mean, I think part of what I do is actually changing sounds and vibes and styles in a certain way, and that's almost part of my style.
Yeah.
And
I would say that about the stuff I've seen of you. I mean, it's always changing. It's like a different kit pretty much every post, and different sounds. And
yeah.
I think
go ahead.
No, it's fine. It's kind of like realizing what are your strong, like what is your calling card? Why are people reaching out to you? And kind of, I think I could spend, 20 grand and find myself and get a bunch more gear and have those options. But is that why people are knocking on my door or my email? I think it's great that
I think that's actually like the perfect kind of wrap up for this, is because a lot of what I'm trying to talk to, drummers who record themselves, it's like, especially now, it's not about having, a whole bunch of 87s in an incredible room and all the, a Neve board and 1176 is like, is that stuff awesome? Yes. But do you have to spend 20 to 50 grand to have that to do this? No. And you're like a great example of somebody that's creating a unique thing to you that's working for a lot of artists, and you're doing it and
trying
on a fairly minimal I don't want to say, minimal mics and just getting it done. Minimal drums, minimal mics, making vibes.
I mean, also like, because of what's happened in the last 4 months, now you have the marketplace, like everyone's doing it now, right?
Right. Various
levels of, like, you have guys in the last couple months that have never recorded themselves saying, getting a rig and offering their services,
Mm-hmm.
which is also, now there's just more people doing it, right? Which is good and bad. So it's kind of, I think what's going to set anybody apart is having a sound that people want on their recordings.
Right.
And we live in a world where, with the use of plugins, and I couldn't do this 5 years ago. I couldn't do what I do 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You could have, because you had, I'm assuming, because of the studio space you had built out, but just the way technology keeps catching up, anybody can do this, which, and yeah, I think it's really character is what's going to set people apart from each other.
Right. Which is, in my opinion, it's what it should be. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think the homogenous thing about music these days, it's missing, drummers have personalities, bass players have personalities. Like,
Yeah.
that's what makes bands cool. Bands are not really the thing right now, but that's what makes bands cool. Not the guys that are necessarily incredible, stellar musicians. It's the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 people together that are creating something that has the styles of their personalities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Right on. We could go on and on.
I know.
I'm ending every conversation like this. We could go on and on,
Yeah.
because I still have a lot more questions, but I think it's probably a good spot to,
For sure.
probably a lot of information.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. So thank you. And we'll wrap soon, and appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Blair. Thank you.
All right. See you, Gunnar.